My name is Matthew Sanders. I'm the CEO of Longbeard, which has just recently released an AI product called Magisterium AI. That's a good question. I mean, ultimately, it's a series of algorithms, algorithms which people program, and essentially a rule set is another way of saying it. Nothing more as of right now. But as algorithms get more and more sophisticated, the rule sets become more and more difficult to comprehend and penetrate, even by those who initially created them. And so, in the past, AI has been very much been something very simple, which is the AI we see today is something called narrow AI. It's told to do something very specifically by the person who programmed it, and it does that. But what the AI community is working towards, at least a chunk of it, is through something called general AI, which goes beyond that, in which it's capable of doing more than just a specific narrow task. It's capable of doing multiple tasks and without specifically needing a human intervention. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, what AI is and where it's going. But I could provide a much larger answer, but I think that's probably the simplest way to understand it. Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think that the big thing that's come on the scene in the AI world is generative AI, in which you're seeing companies like OpenAI and DeepMind and companies like Anthropic take a leadership role in. I think why you should care about is essentially it's going to be changing our world over the next 5 to 10 years in very substantial ways. It's a technology that we can't afford to ignore because it has massive implications, not just at an accelerating technological development, but actually on things like work, security, human health, and well-being. And so I think the technology holds a lot of promise, but it's moving at a very rapid pace. And I think what you're seeing now in kind of news cycles and such is a lot of people asking questions about, well, first one, exploring and getting excited about the technology, but also asking questions about where is this going? How will it affect me? How will it improve my life? And what ways could it actually become a problem or challenge? And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's worth paying specific attention to what people say about it, especially in the public sphere.
And does the Catholic Church have anything specific to say about AI?
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious AI is a very kind of new technology, although it's been worked on for many years. I would say it's new in the sense that it's actually been developed to a point where actually it can start adding value to people's lives. And I think OpenAI and ChatGPT, more specifically, the product that OpenAI developed, was kind of a big wake up call for a lot of those who've been following AI technology for some time. As far as, what does the church have to say about it? I mean, at this point, not a whole lot, aside from Pope Francis has reflected on it on several occasions and said it's a tool which has, enormous potential, and I think has enormous power, but it's a tool. And in the same way, the printing press and the radio and the television, when those technologies rolled out, the church had to adapt, and obviously the world had to adapt. As AI is starting to develop more and more, humanity is going to have to adapt. And so I think it's what the popes have said, basically it's a tool and it has to be used responsibly. And so that's kind of the challenge he's put out there to those developing the technology and those regulating it, is to make sure they understand the technology, its implications, and are taking the appropriate steps to ensure that it's ultimately going to accelerate human flourishing and not detract. I mean, one example would be, I think there's a movie that came out called Her not too long ago, where essentially somebody kind of fell in love with an AI. And so it became a surrogate for an actual human relationship. So this would certainly be something that Pope Francis would not encourage. AI is a tool, and it should be a tool that is there to enhance our humanity, not detract from it. And so if we're opting to interact with machines instead of real human beings, that would be a problem. Another caution I think that Pope Francis would suggest is if AI comes out and starts causing massive systemic issues to the world order, such as unemployment on a grand scale, this would always be a problem. People losing their livelihoods, not being able to provide for their families. And so, although I think he would acknowledge that AI is an important role to play in the global economy, we have to make sure again it's rolled out in a responsible way, so it doesn't disrupt people's lives to a huge extent. So, those would be two. There's a lot more that covering security and privacy and such, but I think those are two that would probably be close to his heart. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think if we don't, that ultimately will not help the faith. I think that could in the end hurt the faith, because and I don't mean the faith per se, but I mean our ability to spread it effectively and for it to be a blessing to others. In the same way, the printing press was a huge boon for the faith. And I think most people would argue the radio and television were great boons for the faith as well. Just think of Fulton Sheen. I think AI also has the possibility to be very helpful. One of the reasons we created Magisterium AI, for instance, is when I was in seminary studying theology, I became increasingly aware of how big it is, how much there is, and how tough it is to really grasp. Although the basics are, the golden rule is pretty simple to understand, but when you start trying to apply church teaching in many contexts, it becomes a lot to take in, and trying to remember it all, and it is a lot to ask for regular people who have a lot to do in the day, raising families and going to work. And so what we wanted to do is find a way to make church teaching more accessible to people. And so Magisterium AI was one way to do that. And again, when we say AI, I think we have to again remember what AI is, right? It's just an algorithm. And so, what Magisterium AI is doing, for instance, it's really like, I would say, a useful librarian would be in the sense that it performs the function of going and retrieving information from sources, and then it can often come and explain to you why these particular resources may be of use to you based on a query that you present. And so we call it AI, but really it's just a large language model and a few other technologies at work here. And so if you think of it along those lines, it's just a very helpful librarian who has access to a lot of books. Then I think it's easier to see it as a tool and not an existential threat to humanity. Sure. I mean, I get asked, what is Magisterium AI for? And, there's no really one answer to that. I would say, one of the more popular ways people use it is to answer simple catechetical questions. So, why is there a Trinity, right? Do Catholics worship Mary? These kind of clarifications. Another way it's being used is, as priests become busier and busier and busier, and more, so there's more demands on their time. There's less time to do things like prepare for homilies in some cases. And so Magisterium AI is used by some priests to help them prepare a homily. And so it helped them do a little research. So if they're doing if they prepare a homily on Christ the King, for instance, and they're curious to know what popes have said in their homilies on Christ the King, they can ask Magisterium AI to prepare a draft homily referencing particular popes' reflections on it. And that helps them, put together some insights, which they can then, include in their final homily. That's one. Another one that's been used is for academic research. So someone may have a particular question about what did St. Augustine say about this, or what did Pope so-and-so say about that? And they can go to Magisterium AI and it'll query a database and see if they have anything to say about it. So these are a few of the areas that we found that a lot of people, tend to be making use of it for those particular use cases. When ChatGPT first came out, we were really excited about it. I mean, we'd been following AI as a company for quite some time, and we're really excited about the developments we were seeing, but we weren't really sure where it was at and if it was ready to actually be useful as a practical tool. When ChatGPT came out and OpenAI launched it, we were actually surprised at how far they'd gotten. And so we realized that LLMs were now at a point that, they could parse something as challenging as church teaching. Maybe not perfectly, well, certainly not perfectly, but there have been a significant improvement over what we'd seen before. And so, and one of the reasons why we felt that although ChatGPT is very exciting, it's not sufficient is it has a few problems which they're still trying to work through, despite the fact it's an enormously, I think it's a very positive technology in many respects, but it has this tendency to hallucinate, which means if it doesn't have an answer, it will just generate one, kind of make it up or fudge things in order to give you an answer. So that obviously is a problem, because we don't want an AI. If someone asks someone a doctrinal question, we don't want the AI to make it up. So that was one thing that we wanted to address when we built Magisterium AI. And another important aspect of that is when you ask ChatGPT a question and it generates an answer, it doesn't give you references. The newer version of it will provide you references to the internet, to certain places where it's sourcing information, but in the past, it didn't provide you references. And so what we wanted to do with Magisterium AI is when somebody asks a question and it generates an answer, we wanted every point it makes to have citations, so people could check to make sure that, first of all, that's legit. But two, if they wanted to additional reading on it, then they could easily click a link and be directed to the actual source. And so that's something that when we rolled at Metastream, I think that was very popular. And so, and we continue to even develop that particular aspect of Metastream AI, and we'll be launching a new product, which is basically activating a scholarly mode. Because right now, Metastream AI is built on just about 5,000 magisterial documents. But obviously, there's a lot more that's been said in the theological and philosophical world, aside from what's been proclaimed by the magisterium. And so we want to try and embrace Catholic thought, such as the Summa by Thomas Aquinas, or the City of God by Augustine, which isn't magisterial teaching, but of course is important, bedrock when it comes to theological thought. And so allowing people the option to query magisterial teaching if they want an official answer, or to ask a question of the kind of Catholic scholars and thinkers from the past. This is something in particular we think would be incredibly useful, particularly as we'll be providing those citations. And again, some of the theological works that we're including into our database, thanks to our partnerships with institutions like the Pontifical Oriental Institute and other libraries, are not available on the internet. So frankly, just ChatGPT doesn't have access to the resources. And so some of the answers you get in Metastream AI are just more comprehensive. You're right. So Metastream AI actually works in a number of languages. I would say it works solidly in 10. It technically works in more than 10. So you can always give it a try. I mean, a lot of the languages you'd expect, given the Catholic Church's constituency. So English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, German, and so on. The user interface is also available in multiple languages. And so when you go to the Metastream AI, if your particular language is supported, it'll default to your language. So if I'm Russian and I go to Metastream AI, it'll present the user interface in Russian. You can also query in Russian as well and receive a Russian answer. One of the objectives of this project, as I said, was to make church teaching more accessible. And for this reason, we want to make sure that when we launched it, it worked in multiple languages and would work on really any internet capable device. And so we were really encouraged to see that after we launched it, within a few weeks, it was being used in 125 countries around the world. Everywhere from the United States to China, Indonesia, India, Africa. And so, our initial hypothesis that this is a tool that we think the church is ready for and would use was quickly validated by the users themselves. And we've been fortunate to get some really good feedback and ideas about how to improve the product in the future. I think when it comes to evangelization, there's a saying, I think at this point, people tend to roll their eyes when you say it, but meeting people where they're at. I think as a maxim, it's still pertinent. And I think it is an effective strategy in many ways for evangelization. St. Paul employed it to great effect in his ministry. And I think today, a lot of people, especially young people, are on the internet more and more and more. And just because they're on the internet doesn't mean that they don't have the same existential questions as our forebears have had. I think that they're just kind of limited on who they can ask those questions to, at least if they want to ask them, directly, just to someone like a priest, a leader of the church. Given that so few priests are, on the internet on a perpetual basis because they have a lot of work to do in the parish and in other places. So there's that, but there's also the issue of, if I have, important theological or philosophical questions and I ask the internet right now, I mean, we've all experienced in Google search, the answers you get can be good or they can be deranged. And even technologies like OpenAI, I think are better in many respects. They're certainly not good enough. And so I think providing a safe place for someone to go and ask questions of the church and get answers straight from the church teaching themselves, I think could be very, very useful in people's journeys. Obviously, it's not sufficient, but we feel it could be a good point of entry that would take them on a journey, which we would hope would lead them to a personal encounter with a priest or a Catholic at a parish. And so that's one of the reasons why we created it, was just a recognition that this is where people are at. This is the internet age, and if the church doesn't do a better job of providing its teaching in this specific forum, well, the vacuum is going to be filled by others. And so this is why I think it's important that not only the church embrace AI, but that in many ways it promotes a safe version of it? Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think yes, like AI is a tool, right? And so as a tool, it could be wielded for great good, I think, or it could be wielded for enormous harm. And we're already starting to see that. For an example of that would be AI is responsible for a lot of great enhancements in deepfakes, which is a serious problem. I mean, you could take Pope Francis and you could replicate his voice and his face, and you could have him saying all kinds of ludicrous things, and that could be very hurtful to people, especially if it's done subtly. There's a famous picture of Pope Francis wearing a big puffer jacket, white puffer jacket, and that was huge. I mean, the internet exploded; they loved it. But of course, that's not how Pope Francis rolls. So as fun as it is, it's a mischaracterization of Pope Francis and a message that he's trying to bring to the world. So obviously, we have to be careful that AI is not used, to that import, and that's why having good, strong government regulation of AI is important. I think using AI to misrepresent what people believe and misrepresent what they say, I think is egregious, and I think it eventually should be a crime. That said, I think, but AI can also be an enormous boon to the faith. Like I said before, I mean, so for instance, much of which Pope Francis has said as AI is now available in Magisterium AI. So if you wanted to ask a question like, what does the church think about artificial intelligence? Well, it'll query Pope Francis's reflections on it, among others, and share those. And so in that respect, it can be very useful to people. And they can have confidence that the question that they're asking, that the answers that are being generated from official ecclesial sources, not someone, who's got a chip on their shoulder on some blog. And this is a big problem with large language models, even how they're actually created, right? That they're created by, chewing through an enormous amount of data on the internet. And when you're going through and scraping blogs from your random people and institutions, there can be a lot of mixed views in there, and that may be useful to the LLM to better comprehend human language, but it also can inform its views on things, which is why it's so critically important that it provides sources. So if an AI or an LLM says something, you can actually go and check and make sure that it's consistent with, in our case, church teaching. I think what I would say is just to remind Catholics that whenever a new tool is been introduced in the past, it's caused enormous disruption. The printing press, there were those who were out there who were very nervous about the printing press, because you'll take someone's words and you'll spread them around, and people could then misrepresent them or misconstrue them. And I think the same thing you could say about the radio. When the radio came out, a lot of people felt, well, if I can hear my bishop on the radio, then why would I bother going to the cathedral to hear him talk in person? This was a concern. Now, obviously, that didn't turn out to be the case, because what they discovered is that as people are introduced to what the bishop has to say, like, for instance, Bishop Fulton Sheen, that in many ways encouraged them to actually re-engage the faith and participate in it. And so I would encourage people to take a similar view of our artificial intelligence. Although it's a technology with great power and it has to be wielded responsibly, if we choose to use it for good, it could do enormous good. And I would say that if you haven't had a chance, to try, for instance, Magisterium AI and see what we're doing with artificial intelligence, I would encourage you to do so, because I think it may pleasantly surprise you. And that this is not a venture that we intend to do alone. We are working with the Pontifical Oriental Institute and many other institutions to ensure that this technology is developed properly. And we're very open to feedback from the community. One, about how to make sure it's being used responsibly, but also how to ensure that the development of the technology is something that will meet actual people's needs and people can be excited about. So if they have ideas about how the product could grow and better serve them, we're always welcome to hearing those. So if you'd like to check out Magisterium AI, you can visit us at magisterium.com. It's pretty straightforward. You'll see there it works very much like ChatGPT. There's a simple query box in there. You can punch in your question and it will generate an answer. Also, there's an opportunity there to create a user account, which gives you a bunch of other options. One particular feature I'd recommend checking out is the simple ability to copy, share the responses. We found that unlike ChatGPT, in which you have to kind of copy the actual text generating the answer, being able to do a one click and pop it into WhatsApp message has been a feature people really enjoy. So give the product a test, and please do provide us feedback because we're always looking for ways to improve.